I still remember the fragrance of the jasmine flowers that adorned the walls of the quaint little chapel, a comforting contrast to the nervous energy in the air. My name is Emily, and I was about to marry James, a man I had fallen deeply in love with. Or at least, I thought I had. When I first saw him standing at the altar, in his charcoal black suit and shining eyes, my heart skipped a beat. For a moment, everything was perfect. Then my eyes drifted towards the front row, and I saw her, Linda, James's mother. She was wearing a white dress, almost as ornate as my own wedding gown. Who wears white to a wedding that's not their own? A silent but screaming omen of the turmoil that was to unfold. As I walked down the aisle with my father, Linda caught my eye and sighed, loudly enough for those close by to hear. I tightened my grip on my father's arm, urging myself to shake off the irritation. After all, today was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. My father handed me over to James, and we exchanged smiles. Yet, I couldn't help but glance at Linda. She was glaring at me, her eyes scrutinizing every inch of my being. When the priest began talking about the sanctity of marriage and the vow to stand by each other in good times and bad, Linda scoffed. "Do you, Emily, take James to be your lawful wedded husband?" The priest's words brought me back to the present. "I do," I said, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. "And do you, James, take Emily to be your lawful wedded wife?" Before James could answer, Linda audibly whispered to her neighbor, "Let's hope he knows what he's getting into." "I do," James replied, not batting an eye at his mother's crass behavior. We exchanged rings, and I felt a slight sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. That illusion broke at the reception. Linda cornered me near the buffet table. "So, Emily, I heard you're working a regular 9-to-5 job. It must be nice not having any ambition." "I love what I do, Linda," I defended myself, keeping my smile intact. "Of course you do, dear. It's easy to love something that doesn't require much from you." Before I could respond, James intervened. "Mom, leave her alone. It's our wedding day." "But it's also a day for the truth, isn't it?" Linda responded, holding her ground. James just sighed and walked away, leaving me alone with her once again. The proverbial cherry on top was the first dance. James and I took to the floor, and just as we started to sway to our love song, Linda cut in. "May I?" she asked, not really asking at all. James hesitated but said nothing, allowing his mother to take my place. I watched them dance, the sharp stab of humiliation mingled with heartbreak. My wedding day was supposed to be the start of a beautiful journey. Instead, it felt like a drawn-out trial, testing my patience, my self-esteem, and my love for James. What hurt most was not Linda's blatant attempts to belittle me. It was James's silent compliance, his refusal to stand up for me, and his passive endorsement of his mother's bullying that shattered the joyous bubble I had been living in. In that chapel, amidst the fragrance of jasmine and the clamor of celebration, a seed of dread took root in my heart. Little did I know, it was a foreshadowing of a long, challenging battle in a war I had not enlisted for, but had no choice but to fight. After the stressful festivities, I thought moving into our home would mark a new beginning. It was a cozy 2-bedroom house with a garden, my sanctuary away from the world. James seemed to like it too. Or so he said. "Our love nest," he called it, on the day we moved in, wrapping his arms around me. However, it didn't take long for Linda to invade the sanctuary. Every weekend, like clockwork, she would show up with her arsenal of judgments and criticisms. The first time she visited, she performed her version of a grand tour, commenting on every single room. "So, this is the living room?" Linda asked. Her voice tinged with disdain as she looked around at my carefully chosen furniture and decor. "Yes," I replied, swallowing my irritation. "I like to think of it as a space where everyone can relax." "Ah, the desperate pursuit of the middle-class dream," she said, smirking. James, who was standing nearby, offered a feeble attempt at diffusing the tension. "Mom, come on, it's a nice place." "Nice is a word for things you don't have to think about, dear," Linda retorted. Once again, he said nothing in my defense. During dinner, I served a homemade lasagna, hoping to impress her. Linda took one bite, then looked up with her signature smirk. "Do you always use store-bought sauce, Emily?" she asked. Trying to maintain composure, I responded, "I thought it would save some time, and it usually turns out quite tasty." "That's the problem with your generation. Always looking for shortcuts," Linda countered, pushing the plate away. Feeling defeated, I looked at James for support. His response was a shrug and a mouthful of lasagna. "Mom's got her tastes. Don't mind her," he said, not meeting my eyes. Every one of Linda's visits became an ordeal to survive rather than a family occasion to enjoy. My sanctuary began to feel like a battleground. The garden where I used to find peace was now a spot where I escaped for a few minutes of solitude, often with tears in my eyes. My own home started feeling like a house of cards, fragile and always on the verge of collapsing. Despite the evident emotional warfare, James seemed oblivious. Each time I tried to talk to him about it, he'd shut me down. "She's just set in her ways, Emily. Don't take it personally," he'd say. But how could I not? She was attacking not just my home, but my very identity. What confounded me was James' indifference. It wasn't just that he wasn't supporting me. It felt like he wasn't even part of this household. While Linda's disdain for me was clear and upfront, James's neglect was subtle, manifesting through his silence and absence, making it even more devastating. The man I had married seemed like a stranger. His mother, a looming shadow I couldn't escape, and our home, a theater where I played the eternal, undesired guest in a tragic drama. I held on, thinking that love would eventually smoothen these rough edges, unaware that the situation would soon escalate into something I couldn't ignore or forgive. I felt trapped, and my only consolation was the work I loved, unaware that it would eventually become my way out of this living nightmare. 2 years rolled by like an endless, gray haze. Just when I thought I had grown somewhat accustomed to Linda's weekend attacks, a seismic shift hit our already rocky life. One evening, Linda showed up at our doorstep unannounced, her car filled with boxes and luggage. "I've decided to move in with you," she declared, not even bothering to frame it as a question. "My house is getting renovated, and it's uninhabitable for a few months." I looked at James, hoping for some form of resistance, but he seemed almost relieved. "Sure, Mom, that sounds like a great idea." "James, can I talk to you for a moment?" I pulled him aside, my voice tinged with desperation. "We never discussed this. I can't just have her move in without any notice." "Emily, it's my mom. I can't say no to her." "So, you're saying yes to her and no to your wife?" "It's just for a few months, Emily. What's the big deal?" With that, the decision was made. Linda moved into the guest room, but her presence quickly expanded to fill every nook and cranny of our lives. It wasn't just an intrusion. It was a full-scale occupation. The first week was an omen of the misery to come. Linda made it her mission to dominate every aspect of the household. "This is how we're going to arrange the kitchen," she declared on her second day, completely reorganizing my utensils and appliances. "And you must start preparing healthier meals." "We've been doing just fine," I retorted, clenching my fists to keep my composure. "Fine is not good enough for my son," she snapped back. Her next act was to assign household chores, clearly skewed in her favor. "Emily, since you're home by 6, you should handle the cooking and cleaning. I will take care of the gardening." "But I love gardening," I said. "It's my way to relax." "Well, now it's mine," Linda countered with a triumphant smile. James remained a silent spectator in all of this, always buried in his work or mysteriously absent during these confrontations. His silence was deafening, his absence a betrayal. It seemed that not only did he permit her to move in, but he also gave her carte blanche to redesign our lives as she saw fit. What was once my sanctuary now became my prison. Every room in the house echoed with Linda's voice. Every corner bristled with her presence. Even my workspace at the police department couldn't provide the respite it once did, as my personal life began to crumble beyond recognition. As the days rolled into weeks, I started doubting myself and my worth. The woman who had been trained to resolve conflicts, to uphold law and order, was struggling to maintain peace in her own home. But amidst the claustrophobic despair, a turning point was looming on the horizon. A discovery that would shatter the illusion of this dysfunctional domesticity and ignite the fuse for my long overdue revenge. I always liked doing the laundry. There's something soothing about the hum of the washing machine, the softness of freshly cleaned clothes, and the scent of detergent wafting through the air. It was one of the few tasks Linda had not monopolized, and I found solace in this mundane chore. On a gloomy Saturday afternoon, I decided to clean behind the washing machine. It was one of those areas that you forget about until you realize you haven't touched it in years. I pulled the machine away from the wall, expecting to find the usual dust and lint. What I discovered was something far darker and more insidious. A small package wrapped tightly in plastic was tucked behind the machine. Curiosity turning into alarm, I opened it cautiously, only to find a stash of drugs, pills and powders in various forms. My heart pounded in my chest. Drugs? In my home? As a police officer, my instincts kicked in immediately. I took photos, bagged the evidence carefully, and pondered my next move. My initial thought was to confront Linda and James, but something held me back. I needed proof. After all, I had learned over the years that the line between victim and perpetrator is often blurred and fraught with complexity. "Emily, have you seen my earrings?" "The gold ones," Linda yelled from the hallway, oblivious to the turmoil unfolding just a few feet away. "No, Linda, I haven't," I replied, my voice surprisingly steady. I couldn't afford to show any signs of distress. That night, after dinner, I took the package to the station. "Emily, this is serious. You sure you want to go down this road? He asked, concern etched on his face. I need to know, Mark, I said, my voice tinged with a determination I hadn't felt in years. It took only a couple of days to get the results, and my worst fears were confirmed. The fingerprints on the package belonged to Linda. My mind raced with questions and confusion. What was she doing with drugs? Was she using them? Selling them? And most importantly, did James know about this? In that moment, a myriad of emotions washed over me. Anger, betrayal, disbelief. But above them all was an overwhelming feeling of vindication. Here was tangible, irrefutable proof of Linda's malfeasance. Something that went far beyond the realm of domestic squabbles and into the territory of criminal activity. I kept the information to myself, biding my time for the perfect moment to strike. My instincts told me to arrest her immediately, but something held me back. I wanted her to face not just the legal repercussions of her actions, but also the social disgrace and humiliation she had so mercilessly inflicted upon me. As fate would have it, the perfect opportunity was just around the corner. My family was coming over for a long-planned get-together, a rare occasion for socializing and celebration. It would be the stage for Linda's ultimate reckoning, and this time, I would be the one pulling the strings. For years, I had played the victim in a narrative Linda had masterfully crafted, but now the tables were about to turn. I felt a newfound sense of purpose and control, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of my dismantled life. It was my turn to rewrite the story, and trust me, I had every intention of making it one hell of a plot twist. The day of the family gathering dawned bright and sunny, a beautiful contrast to the storm that was about to unfold. I had spent the previous evening meticulously preparing for the party. The house was immaculate, the table set with my finest china, and an array of delicious dishes filled the kitchen. My family arrived first, my mom, dad, and younger sister, Anna. They had always been a pillar of strength for me, but I never let them into the ugly realities of my life with James and Linda. Today, however, I felt like I owed them the truth. Before I could say anything, the doorbell rang again, signaling the arrival of James' family. The tension in the air was palpable as Linda made her grand entrance. She swept into the room, casting disdainful glances at my parents and sister, as if their mere presence was a blight on her day. "Ah, the lesser half of the family is already here, I see," she announced, laying down her purse like she was planting a flag. "Welcome, Linda. Please make yourself at home," my mom said, extending a courtesy that was neither deserved nor reciprocated. As we settled into the living room, Linda started her usual tirade of criticisms disguised as casual conversation. "Emily, have you considered getting a new set of curtains? These look like they're from last century," she quipped. "Actually, they were my grandmother's," I replied, biting back my frustration. "They have sentimental value." "Sentimental or not, they're outdated," Linda said, flicking imaginary dust off the armrest of her chair. The evening dragged on, every minute a drop in the ocean of awkwardness and tension. As we sat down for dinner, I noticed Linda becoming increasingly agitated. I'd informed Mark to make sure the police arrived during dinner, but even I was getting nervous waiting for them. Finally, as dessert was being served, the doorbell rang. I glanced at Linda and caught a flicker of concern cross her eyes. My heart pounded as I opened the door to find two of my colleagues standing there in full uniform. "Evening, Emily." Mark nodded, stepping inside. The room fell silent, eyes darting from one face to another. Linda's eyes narrowed and her gaze settled on me. "What is this, Emily? One of your police games?" "It's no game, Linda," I said, my voice unwavering. "We found a package of drugs in this house. Drugs that had your fingerprints all over them." "That's ridiculous," Linda snapped, her eyes darting. "James. Tell them, James. Tell them it's not true." James, for the first time in years, looked as lost and confused as I felt. "Mom, is it true?" His voice trembled. Before Linda could answer, Mark intervened. "Linda, you are under arrest for the possession of controlled substances. You have the right to remain silent." As they handcuffed her and led her away, I felt a myriad of emotions wash over me. The most powerful among them was relief, mixed with a touch of sorrow for the man who had been my husband. But there was no room for that now. It was time to close this painful chapter and finally turn the page. As the door closed behind them, my dad broke the silence. "For the first time in a long time, Dad, I am more than okay," I said, my eyes meeting my family's. "I am free." I'd been confined, belittled, and betrayed in my own home. Today, the walls of that prison came crumbling down, and I walked out unshackled, my head held high. I had reclaimed not just my home, but also my life, and no one could ever take that away from me again. Weeks went by like a blur, but eventually, the day of the court hearing arrived. I dressed in a charcoal gray suit, my hair pulled back into a neat bun, projecting the image of someone who would accept nothing less than justice. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt an air of solemnity envelop me. This was the arena where countless fates had been decided, and today it would decide Linda's. My family sat on one side of the room, offering silent support. On the other side was James, looking disheveled and defeated, a shadow of the man he once was. "Linda Johnson, you are charged with possession of controlled substances with the intent to distribute," the judge began, his voice echoing across the room. "How do you plead?" "Not guilty," Linda snapped, standing defiantly as if the very courtroom was an affront to her dignity. The proceedings unfolded in a manner that was both procedural and dramatic. My colleagues from the police force presented the evidence, the drugs, the fingerprints, and even surveillance that showed suspicious behavior on Linda's part. When it was my turn to testify, I took the stand with a sense of gravitas. "Officer Emily Williams, could you please describe how you found the drugs in question?" The prosecutor asked. "In a package behind the washing machine in my home," I answered, my voice steady. "And were there any fingerprints on the package?" "Yes, they were Linda Johnson's," I said, locking eyes with her for just a moment. It was enough to see the flicker of defeat. The defense tried to paint me as an aggrieved wife seeking revenge, but their case fell apart under scrutiny. By the time the closing arguments were made, I knew we had her cornered. The judge returned with the verdict. "Linda Johnson, you are hereby sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for drug possession and intent to distribute." As the gavel hit the sound block, a wave of relief washed over me. It was over. The twisted reign of Linda was finally over. I turned to leave the courtroom, and my eyes met James. "Emily, can we talk?" He mumbled, taking a step toward me. "I think everything that needed to be said has been said, James," I replied, the weight of my wedding ring suddenly unbearable. I slipped it off and handed it to him. "Goodbye, James." As I walked out of the courtroom and into the sunlight, I felt as if a massive burden had been lifted off my shoulders. The sky seemed bluer, the air fresher. I was greeted by my family, their faces glowing with a mix of relief and pride. "Mom, Dad, Anna," I said, embracing them tightly. "Thank you for standing by me." "We always will, Emily," my mom replied, her eyes glistening with tears of happiness. I drove to the station after leaving the courthouse, not to resume my duties just yet, but to hand in my statement and documentation for the final time on this case. Mark was waiting for me, a smile stretching across his face. "You did it, Em," he said, giving me a friendly hug. "Not just her, Mark. I've dismantled the prison that was my life. And now," I said, taking a deep breath, "I can finally start living." Justice had been served, and revenge, in its own way, was complete. But as I left the station, I knew that the real triumph was not in Linda's downfall, or even in reclaiming my autonomy. It was in rediscovering my sense of self, a self that was resilient, that could not be broken, and that would henceforth live life on her own terms, unfettered and free.